wait till everybody who got admitted in, kind of their audio. I see some of them, it still says it's waiting for their audio to connect. So we'll wait just a minute for the computer to catch up. Looks like everybody but Neil's all connected in. Hello, welcome to the Puget Sound Beekeepers meeting. We're getting towards spring, so the meetings get more and more fun and valuable as our bees all start waking up. And I see Tracy's here. Thank you, Tracy. Do you have our beginner lesson for this month?
I do. Hello, everyone. Let's see. I can even share that here. Let's see. Share. Well, let's start with a show of hands. Who's expecting a package? Raise your electronic hand. If you hover along the bottom of the screen, you should be able to raise your electronic hand. Awesome. So several of you are. Thank you. You can go ahead and put those down. And then, so if you're expecting a nucleus colony or a nuke, raise your hand. All right, so we've got everyone represented here. Awesome. So I've got a little bit for each of you. Cynthia, you can go ahead and put your hand down. There you go. I'll first talk for the folks that have bees right now. I've got a little bit of tips for you guys to start with, and then we'll talk about how to install a package and a nuke, because I think that some of you will be getting your bees prior to the April end of the month meeting. So we'll move right along to those folks that are looking at their bees flying right now. And congratulations to those of you on the call who made it through the winter. Let's make sure that we get your bees through the next couple of months so that you don't end up with starved bees before the blackberries and the maples start blooming. So when you're thinking about going out and inspecting your colonies over the next week or so, make sure you do have a plan, that you bring your tools and notebook or any online tool that you want to use to record what you've learned or what you're observing. And then if you're thinking about changing out any woodenware, like I've started to change out my moisture boards and moisture quilts for my inner covers. So if you're planning on doing that, make sure you have all your equipment ready to swap out. And then if you're going to plan on moving frames around, do only reserve that for those warm days like tomorrow when it's going to be above 55 degrees, so you don't chill the brood that they've got going already. And then, of course, work your hives from the back or the side if you can, so that you don't block the entrance. Notice the next one I say, avoid, operative word there. Avoid opening your colonies if it's rainy or windy. I know here in the Puget Sound area, sometimes that's just not possible, and you got to open it up to feed it or add a pollen patty or something. If it is windy or rainy, just be quick. Also, if those of you that are installing packages this month, I've looked at the weather forecast. It looks like it's going to be a typical April around here. So you might want to think about scrounging up a pop-up tent from someone that's a friend of yours that has soccer age kids. Lots of those parents have pop-up tents. And so that's a good thing to have if you're planning on installing packages. You get your package and it's supposed to be raining for the whole next week. What do? Pop-up tents are your friend. And then for those of you that do have bees, again, the bottom point there is to try and do your inspections in the afternoon. And this time of year, that's really when the temperatures are gonna spike above 55 anyway. So the afternoon's the best time to do that. It's when the foragers are out in the field, and it's those foragers that are the crankiest and So if you can do your inspections while they're out gathering food, then they're not as likely to sting you because they're out and they're foraging. And here's the Seattle weather forecast. So this should apply for everybody that has bees, whether you're getting them soon or having them now. Feeding your bees should be top of mind because they're getting to the lowest point of their stores for the spring, and you don't want them to completely run out before the maples start to bloom in the next 3 or 4 weeks. The weather forecast looks rather iffy. We are expecting some average temperatures above 50, but right now it's a good idea to grab some pollen patties from one of the manufacturers and put a pollen patty on top. And just like us, if there's lots of food at the store, but you can't get out to get it, you don't get to eat it. So what'll happen with the bees is if they run out of pollen while it's rainy and icky outside and they can't go get more, they'll actually cannibalize the brood that they have in order to feed the other brood that they have, and you'll end up with a slowdown in production. So people talk a lot about feeding 1-to-1 syrup right now, which is next up, but people don't talk a lot about pollen patties that are equally important. It is just about time. We're on the cusp of time to add 1-to-1 syrup. So if you are thinking about your bees being light on stores now, and you don't want to add dry sugar, you can think about adding 1-to-1 syrup again. The 1-to-1 syrup, again, I've talked about this before. It is 1 part sugar to 1 part water, and you want to just use plain white table sugar on that. And if you want to be fancy and measure by weight, knock yourself out. If you'd rather not be fancy and measure 1 part to 1 part, knock yourself out. That's the way I do it. It's easier. But on the bee forums, you'll hear people really be adamant about, no, it has to be this way. Other people are like, no, it has to be my way. The bees really don't care. 1-to-1, however you measure, is close enough. It is super important as we get into the springtime months, and for those of you that are adding bees and don't have wax, to just feed 1-to-1 syrup until they won't take it anymore. That's the biggest mistake I see new beekeepers make in the spring, is they stop feeding 1-to-1 syrup too soon and they don't get all their wax drawn out. So that's super key. Go ahead and just keep feeding them 1-to-1 syrup until all the wax is drawn. The only time you have to worry about feeding 1-to-1 syrup if you have your honey supers on is if you're planning to sell your honey. And I don't think most people on this call sell their honey anyway. So if you're not selling your honey and you need wax, just keep feeding them 1-to-1 syrup this spring and summer until all your wax is drawn or until they stop taking it. And then lots of people ask about supplements. So there's optional supplements that you can add to your 1-to-1 syrup. If you're interested, you can use white vinegar, 1 to 2 tablespoons per gallon. Same with lemon juice. It adds vitamin C, add 1 tablespoon per gallon. Those also will help cut down on the mold and algae that grow in there, especially as the weather warms up. And then lots of people ask about essential oils. I don't recommend doing a do-it-yourself essential oil, but if you want to buy something like Pro Health or Honeybee Healthy from one of the bee houses, lots of people use those. My caution on that is they say more is better on the label, and I'm here to tell you more is not better. The bees won't eat it at the higher concentrations. So like I use Pro Health, and so it says 1 to 2 tablespoons per gallon, and I use 1, and they'll reliably eat that. But once you put in the 2nd tablespoon, the bees think it's yucky and they won't eat it. One super important thing not to do is, well, a couple things not to do is don't ever feed your bees honey from the store or from an unknown source, because those can contain foul brood spores. And then if that happens, everything's a total loss and you have to get rid of everything, bees, equipment, and the whole 9 yards and start over. So don't ever do that. And then don't feed them brown sugar or molasses because they have lots of fiber in them and it'll actually give the bees dysentery. I'll pause. Is there any questions about feeding right now? Go ahead and raise your hand. Michael, go ahead.
Tracy, will you be speaking about when things are starting to bloom and when the nectar flows? For example, when do the wild blackberries come, and will that factor into when we can pull back on the syrup or other feeding?
We'll talk about that in later meetings, but for now, just feed like crazy. Feed as much as they'll take. And so how much, people always ask how much will they eat? And if one colony this time of year can take usually maybe a half gallon of syrup a week. As they get bigger, of course, they use more. So you just kind of have to play it by ear. Cynthia?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It doesn't look like my bees made it through the winter. And this was my first year, and I don't know what I'm looking for. A lot of my frames are really heavy still. And I've been texting with Kathy, who suggested I put them in the freezer for a couple of days and give it to them 2 at a time when I get my new nukes.
Yep.
But, just being inexperienced, I feel like, I want to do the best I can. And I just, I really don't know what I should be looking for.
Honestly, right now, I would just clean out all the dead bees and start fresh when you get your new bees. And lots of people are in the same boat as you, so don't feel bad. It's not a bad idea to freeze the frames because the wax moths start getting in them this time of year, and the wax moths will ruin everything. So if you can and you have space, go ahead and freeze your frames, and then you can pull them out and let them warm up to outside temperature before you put the bees in them. You just don't want to put frozen frames back in when you get your new bees. All right, someone has their hand raised that says iPhone. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
It's Cindy.
Hey, Cindy.
Hey. So I've been freaking out a little bit about my bees. It seems like it's too cold to treat them for mites, or to open up the hive to do a good hive inspection. I mean, the most I've done is just make sure that they have food, like on the one warm day that I had here, and put some pollen patties in there and sugar water. But it's like, God, I just really want to get in there and see what's going on.
Tomorrow afternoon, if you can, is going to be a great opportunity. Tomorrow's really the last day for the next, really till the 8th, when it's going to be warm enough, maybe Friday the 7th. So I wouldn't worry so much about mites this time of year because the bees are building up. As soon as it warms up a little bit and you get a little bit bigger population in there, go ahead and do an alcohol wash and see where you're at, and then think about using a mite treatment at that point.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad I asked you, because I was planning on getting in there as soon as it was 50 and above, for more than a few days. Okay.
Yeah, if you can get in there tomorrow afternoon, it'd be a great opportunity.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah,
All right.
and then you can clean out the dead bees and start with a nice clean spot too.
Okay.
For those of you that, one last thing about inspections, if you're going to go out tomorrow, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and reduce down the extra boxes. So if your bees are on less than 7 frames, and most of them are right now, in a deep box or in a medium, go ahead and reduce down to 1 deep box or 2 mediums right now. That way they don't have to heat as much space and they'll build up faster. All right, so we'll move along to installing a package. So for those of you that are installing packages, here's the instructions. And of course, this is being recorded, so you can go back and look at the end of the month or later on when you are installing your bees. I don't recommend looking at a lot of YouTube videos on installation because, well, there's a lot of really bad ones out there. But this will give you the basics. So first you want to set up your hive stand, the bottom board, and 1 deep or 2 medium boxes. Obviously suit up, get your smoker lit, and just sit it off to the side. And then those boxes come with a big can of syrup in it. And so my first year, I used my hive tool and I'm trying to pry that can out, I've got my gloves on, I'm trying to pry the can out. All I'm really accomplishing is smashing some of the bees that are trying to crawl out too. The next year I got smarter and figured out all you have to do is tip that box over sideways a little bit, and then the can, use gravity to your advantage, and the can slides out. Do that over the top of your hive body though, because a bunch of the bees will fall out. So what you do is you just gently tip that can out of there, and then you set the can of syrup next to your box. And then the queen cage will be hanging inside that. There's a little cut in the top, and you just slide the queen cage out. You want to look inside there and make sure the queen's crawling around and that she's alive. If she's in there like this, then you need to call right away and get a new one. That happens every once in a while. So if it happens to you, it's a bummer, but it's not the end of the world. Just give the person that you bought the package from a call, and they've always got extra queens for that very problem. So don't worry about it. The first thing you want to do after that is the end of the cage comes with a little cork in it. And so you want to gently remove that plug and replace it with 1 or 2 mini marshmallows. Hopefully the package supplier gave you a couple mini marshmallows. If they didn't, you'll want to make sure and get those before you install your package. The trick with the getting the cork out and getting the marshmallows in is you want to put your finger over the end so the queen doesn't fly off, and then just plug that end with 1 or 2 of those little marshmallows, and the bees will eat that out in a few days. If a disaster happens and the queen flies away, make sure you stand there for a good 5 or 10 minutes, because chances are the queen will fly away and she'll look around and she'll see this big white tree and a bee suit standing next to the hive, and she'll come back and she'll go down in the box. So if that happens, just hold still for 5 or 10 minutes. It seems like an eternity, but that will probably give the queen time to come back. And then in a week, when you come back and look, if that happens, you want to make sure that the queen is back in the box and laying eggs. And if not, you'll need to buy a new queen. So you want to hang that queen in the middle. See how the frames I've got pushed to the outsides, and there's an extra space. You want to use a tack or a little piece of tape. There's a little aluminum tab on there, but it's usually not long enough to go all the way up and over. So you want to tape that queen cage up in the middle, and you want the mesh to be not facing into the frame, but facing perpendicular to the frame, so that she can breathe and so that the bees can get in and feed her. If you put her up against the frame, then the bees won't be able to get to her and feed her. And then you want to gently dump the bees on top. Notice that the bees on this right hand side, there doesn't seem to be as many bees in there as the one in the middle. There are the same amount of bees in this box as in the middle box. It's just that they've had more time to move down inside the box. And then you want to just, you don't have to worry about getting all the bees out. Just set the boxes in front of the hive bodies, and then the remaining bees will fly up in there. So you don't have to worry about getting all of them out. So you set those down, you put the inner cover, the feeder, and the lids back on. And notice the 2 boxes on the left-hand side have medium boxes here, and this one has a deep box. The only difference between these boxes is the size of the box. I have a top feeder in each of those, and I didn't at the time have enough medium boxes to go on top, so I just used the deep. So those are just empty. The top feeder's on top of there, and those boxes are just covering it up. So I lay the pollen patties right on top of the frames. This is whether you have a package or a nuke. You want to lay the pollen patties right on top. I don't lay them right on top of where the queen cage is. In case any of it falls down, I don't want it to fall down on top of her, but I put it like right behind where the queen is or right off to the side. And then after a week, you go back in and inspect to make sure they're drawing wax and the queen started laying eggs. And then once 8 frames are drawn out, then you would add a second box on top of that. The biggest mistake, one of the big mistakes new beekeepers make is they add boxes too soon. Bees don't like social distancing. They like to be up close and personal and have lots of bees around them. So it's better to let them get a little crowded and then add a box. Sam, you got a question? Sam doesn't have a question.
Sorry about that. Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes. What do you recommend for pollen patties? Is there an easy make at home or best to purchase, or what's the recommendation?
Honestly, unless you have a lot of bees, I mean, like a lot of colonies, it's better to just go ahead and buy those. You can buy them in boxes of 10. You can make friends with other PSBA members and split a box of 10. You'll probably only use, maybe 4 pollen patties per colony for the first year. So I'd highly recommend just going ahead and purchasing those, and you can always freeze them too. So
Okay.
make sure that when you buy pollen patties, you're buying the summer pollen patties.
Yes. And if I'm getting bees in like May, getting some nukes, then will I even be worried as much about pollen patties?
Honestly, it's a bigger issue now and with packages, but it doesn't hurt to add a pollen patty even with a nuke. Because even in May, it can be rainy for a long time. And then if they run out of pollen, then and they can't get out, then they're cheap. So it's good insurance to have a pollen patty on there.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sure. All right. And then moving along to installing a nuke. Nukes are easier than installing a package. So, and it's more forgiving too. If the weather is rainy, icky when you get it, all you have to do is sit your nuke on the stand where your box would be and open the door and let the bees fly until it warms up and it's nice. Now you can't leave them in there a long time because they'll swarm because they get too crowded, but you can leave a nuke in the box for 2 or 3 or even 4 days after you get it if it's pouring down rain and gross. You do want to install these when it's warmer because you've got all that brood in there that you don't want to get chilled. So it's better to wait until it's 55. But, if it's close and you work quickly, you'll be fine and you won't chill too much brood. So let's see, you want to light your smoker just like you would when you have a package. And then you want to gently remove one of the outside frames first, because there's usually fewer bees on there and it's less likely that the queen is on that one. So that'll create some space. You gently remove that one frame and stick it in the other box. Note, I'm talking tonight only about installing deep frames into deep boxes. If you're installing deep frames into medium boxes, not to worry. I posted on the PSBA's website a few years ago the instructions on how to convert medium or deep frames into medium boxes, and it can be done, so not to worry. All right, and then so the important thing with nukes is you want to install the nuke frames in the same order as they came out of the nuke box. So if you have, in this instance, there were 3 frames in this nuke, in this fictitious nuke, because there are no bees, but in this case, there are 3 frames with bees and brood on them that I put together in the middle. If you get a nuke and you have all 5 frames have bees and brood on them, you put all 5 frames in the middle. In this case, there are 3 frames with bees and brood, and then the other 2 frames only have honey and pollen on them. So I put those all the way on the outside so that the bees can build the wax on those frames in between more quickly. Do make sure when you're installing your nuke that you actually do have a queen. And your nuke should not have a queen that's in a cage. Your queen should be loose and she should be laying eggs, and there should be all stages of brood in there. Capped brood, open brood, eggs, queen, lots of bees. And then, of course, just like with the packages, you want to place a pollen patty on the top and feed copious quantities of 1-to-1 syrup, because that's what's helping them draw out your wax. Once you get all your frames in there, put the pollen patty on, put your inner cover on. If you're using a top feeder, you would then put the top feeder on, and then the box around it and your telescoping lid. And then just place the empty nuke box next to or in front of that box, and then any remaining bees in there will go ahead and fly in. You don't have to make sure and shake all the bees down inside. They'll all end up back in the big box by the end of the night, or by nightfall. And then just like with the packages, inspect after a week. Once the bees have drawn out and are covering 7 of those 10 frames, then that's when you would add the next box. All right, I know I went fast, so does anybody have any questions about installing your bees? And again, you can go back and watch this video again once it gets posted. Oh my God, I was so fantastic. No one has questions. Michael, you're up.
Yeah, Tracy, is the queen always marked? The queen that comes with the nuke?
Oh, great question. No, the queen is not always marked. It depends on who you buy it from. And then when you buy just the queen later in the summer, if you buy a replacement queen, you can, a lot of places you can request that queen be marked, and it's usually a few bucks more. And incidentally, there is a system for marking queens. Colors correspond to the saying, will you raise good bees? So white, yellow, then what? Will you raise red? G is green and B is blue. Dawn, I can't remember what color it is this year. Yellow, last year was yellow? You're on mute.
This year's red.
This year is red.
Will you raise? 1, 2, 3. Yep.
Thank you. So if you have a queen that is in a package this year and it's marked, or in a nuke and it's this year's queen, it should be red. If you're buying an overwintered queen and it's marked, it should be marked yellow. I will let you know that there are some places that mark their bees white every year because they decided white's easier to see. So if you're buying a queen that's marked, make sure and ask what color and what year she came from. And then if you're bored, Dave Burns is a master beekeeper in the Midwest, and he has a really good beekeeping colony inspection that I show at all my beginning beekeeper spring classes. That YouTube page is the link, and all of his videos are very good. He's a great teacher, and he is really clear on his videos, and he knows what he's talking about. So unlike lots of other YouTube videos, Dave Burns has really good material. And then if you are interested in subscribing to an online bee magazine, Bee Culture's a great one to go with if you're more looking for layperson articles. If you're into scientific geeky stuff, American Bee Journal's the place to go. And then these are 4 good books if you like bee-friendly gardening. And then 2 beginner books that I really like are Stories Keeping Honeybees and The Beekeeper's Handbook. And then if you're into the textbook of all things bees, The Hive and the Honeybee is the internationally recognized textbook of bees written by college professors and other academics. An excellent book, but more of an advanced sort of beekeeping book if you're interested. Do make sure if you get that book, you get the latest edition, which is 2015. There's a lot of old ones that are available on Amazon, but the information's not up to date. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dawn.
Okay, hey, welcome. Thank you. Thanks, Tracy. I always love your beginner lessons. So we're going to do about 30 minutes of club announcements, and then we've got our speaker will be here, or is here, and will be able to speak. So the first thing that's exciting news is we are returning to hybrid meetings, starting with the next meeting. So the in-person portion will be at the Wisteria Room at the Volunteer Park. So those of you who've been there before know that it's a really nice meeting space. It's in the spring when the wisteria blooms. It's beautiful in the summer when you leave the meeting. It's dark out, but it's just beautiful because it's in the middle of the Arboretum. So I always just love that spot. But we will still have classes on Zoom. So you or meetings on Zoom, so you can join either way. We bought an owl, so I'm hoping that we're going to have a really good quality hybrid meeting. Sometimes hybrid meetings can be a little clunky, and I think that we're going to have a good one where everyone feels together in it. So we have some events coming up. Kit, are you ready? Do you want to jump on? Sorry, it was kind of quick.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I was getting organized, but I should have done that sooner. I'm excited to say that we have 2 events in May. Could be a harbinger of a season to come. That's more like times of old. The first one is the Seattle Tilth Edible Plant Sale, which is held at the Good Shepherd Center in Wallingford, at the Tilth. That's where Tilth kind of always started and has been based. And so that will be wonderful. We're looking for 2 shifts of volunteers. See, this is where I need to have it up. We are, the event is from 10 until 3. So the first shift will be from 9 till noon, and the second will be from noon to close. So I am getting that set up.
I think it's 8.
Yeah, it's from 9.
Your paper
9
says
to
8 to
3.
noon.
Yeah.
Kit, your paper says 8 to noon.
Yeah, that's why, here it is. Okay, so true, 8 to noon and noon to 4. But all of the sign up opportunity anyway will be available on the website momentarily. I'm getting get that logged in. So anybody's interested in volunteering can jump in and sign up. Then I would send you updated information about the event as it approaches so that you know where to park and what to bring and what to expect. But it's fun, you know, it's our people, our farmers, fresh food eaters. It's good. It's a good environment for us. So that's on Sunday, May 8th. It's a weekend sale. We're only there on Sunday. So anybody who'd like to get involved, we are going to offer honey tastings, and we're going to offer honey for sale, and we'll have a demonstration hive so that it kind of encourages the crowd to join in and be inquisitive, and kids love to come up, and you know, it's just great fun to talk bees. So if you want to come, it's not about what you know, it's more about just helping out, and then you kind of might get the bug and decide this is your thing, because it is fun. There's a lot of good bee energy. And the fair is fun too. If there's enough of us, you know, we cycle in and out and go and wander. On Saturday, May 20th, it's the West Seattle Bee Fair at High Point. I'm trying to think of how many years this has gone on. It's probably 8 years of this wonderful event at High Point, which is where there is a public, a more or less public beehive. It's It's built into this beautiful octagonal windowed structure that was built on a grant by one of our past board members, Lauren, and she also put in a pollinator garden. And that High Point neighborhood has really developed, and there's a great community association leadership that's pulling this event together. And it's last year it was a really big success. They have a walk ahead of time, a neighborhood cleanup. And so the event that we are there for goes from noon till 3. Same thing, please sign up online. I will remind everybody again next month and keep things rolling. So look for more events this summer too. You can reach out to volunteers at PugetSoundBees.org, and that's me. And I'll know that you're interested too. Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you, Kit. That's wonderful. It sounds like so much fun. And remember, you don't have to be an expert beekeeper to go to these festivals. Even as a first-year beekeeper, you know so much more than the general public about bees. It's just so fun to talk to everyone. Everyone loves the bees. They're so interested to hear about it. And of course, tasting honey is always popular.
Yeah,
I'm just going to take a minute.
There's a
Go ahead,
crowd
go
at
ahead,
the
Kit.
table. There's a crowd at the table the whole time. It's just kind of, you know, it's like being at the circus. So come have fun.
Yeah. And I'm just going to take a second. I'm going to call out Jose's shirt. That is an awesome shirt. Move your hands down, Jose. There you go. I love that t-shirt. That's great. We got a little honey color going here. That's great. So the next event that we're going to talk about is the installation event. Now, this is kind of the highlight of the year at the apiary, is when the bees come in and we get to install them into hives. This is your opportunity to come and see it be done live and participate live. Tracy gave a fantastic description, and that's pretty much how the package installations go, but it's really fun to be there live and see how gentle the bees are and hear them buzzing around. And so the installation event is going to be on Sunday, April 23rd, and it's going to be at 11 a.m. at the Arboretum Apiary. So if you haven't been to the apiary at the Arboretum before, it's right next to the Wisteria Hall, the Wisteria Room, where we're going to be having our in-person portion of our hybrid meetings. If you're there at the visitor center, if you go standing and looking at the Arboretum or at the visitor center, it's to the left, and you'll just walk that way up a little ways and you'll see it's a fenced-in apiary. The space is limited to 20 people. It's 2 packages and it's a kind of a small space. So there will be a sign up coming, and it's going to be posted as soon as possible to the website. So keep an eye on the website. And if you are really interested in joining in this, then make sure to sign up quickly. And then also with the coming of the bees, we're soon going to have an apiary work party schedule, and it will be published. You know, they always call it a work party, which makes it not sound very fun. I always think it's like a mentoring party or, you know, it's a way to go and learn about bees. If you haven't worked bees hands-on with someone, I highly recommend that you go to the apiary. There is a sense and a feel that you get when you pull a frame out and look at it and listen to someone talking about what they see on the frame that you just can't get from YouTube videos or any other way. It's like learning at somebody's elbow, and it just makes a huge difference. Plus, you'll be able to ask questions as they come up, and you'll be able to hear other people's questions, which sometimes are even more informative than the questions we think of. And then let's see, we've got the and then we've got the schedule of markets, which Kit just talked about, and those will be posted to the website. And one last announcement. Oh, you know what I'm going to do here is let me grab my. So one of the things I like to do in the chat here is put a whole bunch of links in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and put them in now. And so then as I get to them, you can grab that link out and use it as a resource. So let's see here. This is going to be a long list of links. Go ahead and copy them out if you want to, and just kind of grab them and open a Word document and copy them out, or save them somehow if you need to. There they are. So included in these links is Dewey Karen's winter survival survey that is just coming out. He's been doing this for many, many years now. 14. So he's in his 14th year of surveying people to see how their bees did over winter. And then he compares that to what the weather was like and any other factors that might affect bee survivability. And then they're compiling this information over time to give us information that affects survivability of our bees. So often when our bees die, we immediately assume it's our fault. Maybe I didn't keep up on my varroa mites. Did I not feed them? You know, trying to figure out why they died. There are sometimes when it's not the beekeeper, but it's the weather or other things. So one of the interesting things that they've learned is it's not the coldest temperatures that kill the bees. It's the fluctuating temperatures in specific months that make it more difficult for the bees to survive. I don't think it's going to just outright kill them on its own, but it does reduce their chances of survival. So what they're looking for is, let's see, it was an extra cold November is hard on the bees. I don't know why, but when the Novembers are extra cold, the loss numbers go up. And they've also found that when February is dry, the loss numbers go up. So all I'm doing is telling you what Dewey Karen said. I haven't quite figured out the logic on that yet, but I find it really interesting because it's not something that I would have guessed. The loss rates are changing over time. They also track the loss rates across the state. Backyard beekeepers, the overall trend of colony losses is decreasing over the last 7 years. The average losses for backyard beekeepers is 49.6%, and it used to be a little higher than that. So it's coming down below 50% losses. And the commercial beekeepers, their losses are actually increasing lately. And again, I have to kind of look for more information and figure out why this might be true, but the commercial losses are going up and their loss rate is about 33.3%. So the link is here. It's the very last link that I put into the chat. Go ahead and take his survey. As soon as you've opened up your hives and know for sure which colonies have survived or not, go ahead and it's anonymous. Send your information in, but the information really helps. Do wait until you've done your first inspection, because if you've got a colony that appears to be alive right now and you're looking at it and you're not seeing any pollen going in, that might be a sign that the queen didn't make it and it's proceeding on its way to being a laying worker colony. So sometimes the queen doesn't make it, but the bees do. So just wait until you've done your first inspection and make sure everything is queen right. The survey will be open through April, and then once it's closed in April, then the statistics become available. Let's see. So volunteering, we're always looking for volunteers. This club is a nonprofit 501c3 run by everybody in this room. You're all participants and volunteers, and we really appreciate you coming to the meetings, asking questions. And if you can come and help at events, that's wonderful. Kit talked about the event opportunities she has. There's also the opportunities that Gerardo's been talking about over the last couple of months. He wanted to make sure that you guys know that this coming Thursday at 8:30 p.m. is the last online session of the training for the community outreach program. And if you're a member and you haven't attended any of those yet, and you're interested to see what kind of community outreach we're doing, go ahead and show up. His contact information, let's see, I'm saying his contact information is in the chat box. He's on the board. So if you go to the board, I think you can contact Gerardo through the board, and he will then send you a link to the community outreach program. As a club, we are really pretty active. We do a lot of things. We've got events and community outreach and an apiary. Not all clubs are lucky enough to have apiaries, so that's a great resource. Let's see. And then also, if you are good at doing newsletters, if you've got a little bit of graphic design or you've done some kind of newsletter before, I would love to hear from you, because I'm trying to do a few things with our newsletter, and I'm an accountant by training, and accountants by training are usually pretty dry. So if you know how to do a few splashy things, it would be new to me, and I would be thrilled to learn about it. So go ahead, and if you're interested, either contact me directly or drop your name into chat, and we can get together. I would really love that. So let's talk a little bit about the current happenings that are going on in your bee yard right now. Hopefully you've got some overwintered bees. If not, try again. It doesn't matter if your bees die. What matters is that you keep trying and keep learning every year. As a couple of people were commenting in chat, the season does seem to be a little bit late this year. It's not as bad as last year was. Last year it was like a whole month behind. This year feels more like it's about 2 weeks behind. That's what the bee vendors are showing. And the longer it takes for spring to show up, it will create a little bit more stress on your bees. What's in the hive right now is almost all those winter bees that were created in, August, September, October, and they live for, 4 to 6 months in the hive, keeping the hive alive during winter, and then spring comes and they start dying off. So I think with 2 weeks we'll be okay. It's not going to put too much stress on the hives. Last year, when it was a month late, all these poor winter bees hanging on, trying to get the queen to lay and build up enough. It was tough last year. So I think we'll be in a much better position this year. The UW released a spring forecast at the beginning of this month that is predicting below normal temperatures for April. And that's kind of what we've been seeing, although not today, but on a lot of the other days, we've got below normal temperatures, and also below normal rainfall for May through June. So it's going to be a little bit cooler, not going to be too soggy and wet, according to the UW. So that's kind of the outlook for our bees this spring. Right now, if add a pollen patty, like Tracy said, go ahead and add that pollen patty to the top of your hive. The trees are beginning to bloom and they're providing pollen to the bees, but it always helps to have that pollen patty in there already. When the trees are starting to bloom, because you can see the cherry trees at the University of Washington and their cherry festival comes into place, then you know that there's starting to be forage out there for the bees. Not as much nectar, lots of pollen. With the first nectar flow shows up with the maple trees. So when you see the big leaf maples, they put out a kind of a green clump of kind of drapey flowers. That's a great nectar source for our bees. You want to continue feeding even when the trees are blooming, because they don't create enough to support the buildup, but that is a nectar source for them. And the thing I always look for is the dandelion blooms. I feel like when the dandelions bloom, spring is here, the bees are going and everybody's happy. So I haven't seen too many dandelions out there yet, but we're waiting. And then also the thing you want to start doing is tracking your varroa. If I was you, I would put together a sheet that says, here's the month I did my alcohol wash for my varroa mites. Here's my number. Here's how many I had. If you don't know how many varroa you have in your hive on any given month because you tested, there's a really high chance that your hive isn't going to make it. You have to watch those varroa. You have to keep the numbers down. So this is the time to start. Form a plan of how you want to track your varroa during the year and what kind of treatments you want to use. If you're not sure of what kind of treatments you want to use, reach out to someone here in the club. We've got neighborhood captains. You can always text me or one of the board folks, anyone you might have questions of. Feel free to reach out and find out how to do that. And I think in the apiary, we'll probably do example of how to do a varroa wash at some point during the year in the apiary. So that we'll talk about that quite a bit. That's a really, really good thing to come to and learn how to do. So I want to talk a little bit more about the community outreach that we're doing as a club. We've got Seeds for Bees, which is a really fun project. We have packets of seeds that are pollinator friendly seeds, and we provide those to pretty much anyone who wants to plant seeds. And it reminds people that we need to create more pollinator friendly areas for our bees. So especially in the areas where there's lots of crops and things, where there's monocropping, the bees wind up with not enough flowers to do well. We do the street fairs like Kit was talking about. Those are a really nice community outreach and fun to do if you want to volunteer for those. We do educational materials for the schools. Gerardo's been really active in that, and it's called Teach the Teacher. And we have a program where we go in and we teach the schools how to teach the kids about bees, because the teachers don't know, and it's a nice package that's put together. For a while there, we were sending out the example hives where you pull a frame out and it's got a picture on it with bees, which was kind of fun for the kids to see what it would actually look like on a frame. We do honey sales. So if you're planning on coming to the live portion of the hybrid meeting, Nancy will likely, if not this meeting, at a future meeting, she will have honey there for sale. And it's kind of nice. We buy 5-gallon buckets of honey from a local beekeeper up in the Skagit Valley. And we have a lot of different flavors to choose from. So it's really fun to buy a jar of someone else's honey and kind of see how the taste is different. We've got swarms and related education. If you are on a swarm list, remember that most of the calls that you get are going to be for yellow jackets and bumblebees. And a few of them will actually be for honeybees, but it's a really nice opportunity to reach out and educate people on what to do with yellow jackets and what to do about honeybees. If you want, there is a way to eradicate yellow jackets that doesn't hurt anything else in the environment, and it's really safe for the homeowner. So if you get a call and if you want to learn how to help somebody with their yellow jackets, send me a note. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Let's see. And we do lots of speakers. We do lots of education for you guys, bringing in speakers. We've got a great speaker today. Garrett is here to talk to us. And so that's kind of all of our fun community outreach things that we do as a club. And let's see, we've got a few more minutes. Kathleen or Jeff, do you have anything to add? Any additional thoughts?
Peter has his hand raised too.
Oh, hey, Peter. Yes.
Hello. We put in the comments, but I just wanted to let people know we have some free pollen patties in Shoreline, ones we made last year. So if people are looking, I know Karen already picked some up. So if people need pollen patties, we have a big box. And then we also have some that we just bought from Global Patties that if you wanted those, we would need to charge for them. But just wanted people to know, I'll put our email in the chat again, if people want free pollen patties.
And I think Randy Oliver did a test on the global pollen patties and a range of pollen patties. And didn't he determine that Global had the best buildup of bees in the spring? Does that sound familiar?
That would be a bad summary. He determined that they were all lacking in amino acids. So he said, basically gave you a recipe to augment them to make them be that right profile. So that doesn't mean
of the commercial ones.
He did the research, so the commercial guys may be adjusting their formulas to account for the missing amino acids that he found.
And the nice thing now with the Global Patties is you can actually customize, so we added some other things to them as well. So you can make a little bit of your own formula.
And
That's
so
awesome.
tell me what you add to them. That's interesting. What do you add?
I'm like, Peter's making honey hot chocolate and I need him to come here and tell. I'm like, he made the order. Period.
I'm sorry, I'm back. I'm a pain. I just needed hot chocolate. Were we asking about the global patties? So we did the 15% real pollen. They have two different amounts of real pollen you can put in them. And then I went ahead and they're doing a new additive that's been tested up in Canada for a few years. The brand name is Agrologics. So I was like, sure, why not? I'll try that. So it has micronutrients in it as well as other stuff. And I figured that, it's described as being, preferred for people working in agricultural areas with bad forage. But I was like, you know what? We're not an agricultural area, but due to weather, we sometimes do have very, very bad forage. So I don't mind having some extra paying a little extra for some extra, micronutrients, whatever, all else. Yeah. So I don't know if, that will end up if that additive will have ended up being useful or not, but I figured why not try it.
Is that similar to Hive Alive? So Hive Alive is a relatively new product. Have you heard of that?
I have used Hive Alive, yeah. And I think I've mostly liked Hive Alive. It's a powder, not a liquid. Hive Alive is a liquid and it uses a lot of seaweed extracts and stuff like that. Hive Alive does. I think I would need to go back and recompare them to, speak specifically about that stuff, about the specific comparison. I did briefly look at that, but not closely enough to, talk about it on the video meeting.
Okay, I put you on the spot there.
And someone was
Okay.
asking about the Man Lake pollen patties. I'm like, we've used.
Yeah, Man Lake pollen
Like-
patties are great.
Yeah.
This was, I don't know what Amy Beth specifically said, but this was just I've also got a ton of dry pollen
Supplement, if people wanna
people
make
want
their
to
own.
make their own.
We're done
I've
making
got
our
lots of-
pollen patties. So if people want.
I've got lots of dry powder. Feel free to come pick up some dry powder if you want to make your own. But these were the dry powder plus ProSweet. I think that was all that was in them, but they're still in good condition, so.
And with dry powder, you can also dry feed pollen during the summer. You can put it out in a covered feeder and the bees will come and forage in it. So that's good to know that's available. Thank you, Peter and Amy Beth. Okay, so I want to take this.
To
Of
dry
course, Jeff.
feeding is make sure you put it up high enough that your dogs can't eat it. I won't tell you how I know that.
Okay. Maybe squirrels and other things, yeah, because it's
Or
got
the
brewer's
mice
yeast
in
in it,
your
right?
garage.
It's surprisingly exciting for a lot of other things than bees too.
Yeah. So I'm going to introduce our speaker for this month. We've got Garrett Slater. Dr. Slater is here to talk to us. He has a PhD from Purdue University. And speaking of nutrition, he has a master's in nutrition and queen quality. And he's worked with the Bee Informed Partnership, which is really an important resource that's making great information available to everyone. Let's see here. He's got 12 years of beekeeping experience, including 8 years with large commercial beekeepers in North Dakota. And tonight, he's going to bring us a talk on bee breeding in the age of genomics, which sounds really interesting. Garrett, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Yeah, let me share my screen. So actually, I'm going to speak a little bit more about my drone research, if that's okay, and I'll talk a little bit more about genomics. Let's see. But first off, I've really enjoyed the conversation here. It's really cool to kind of hear the experiences in the Pacific Northwest. I don't have a lot of experience in that area, so it's cool to kind of hear the struggles you guys go with in the beekeeping in that region. So let's see. Okay, can you guys see everything and hear everything fine? Assume so. Okay. So first off, my name is Garrett Slater, and I'm originally from North Dakota. And just a little bit of background with myself. I grew up in sort of a large beekeeping family. So my uncle, he managed 10 to 15,000 colonies, and so I've been around beekeeping my entire life, especially from sort of a really large scale. And one reason I really decided to focus on research rather than becoming a beekeeper. I mean, one, beekeeping is really hard, especially when you're managing that number of colonies, right? If you're making a living out of it. But second off, beekeepers are facing all these different struggles, and you guys are experiencing the same struggles as the largest commercial beekeepers. And one thing I really wanted to really accomplish is how can I, since I do have that personal experience, I do have those interactions with the beekeepers, how can I use my experience and also get a trained background in research to really make sustainable solutions for the beekeeping industry. And so one thing I've really been interested in for really ever since I started beekeeping, and this is something I think most beekeepers are interested in, is the queens, right? When you have your colony, I mean, the queen is arguably the most important part of the colony. Yet we're seeing that these queens are failing and they're not thriving or reproducing like they should be, right? Like a lot of beekeepers are reporting that queens are failing, within 6 months of purchase, where they should be reproducing for, 2, 4, 5 years at a time. And so this is something I experienced not only as a beekeeper, but during my time with the Beam4 partnership when I was surveying, beekeepers across the country, where this queen issue was, one of the major issues facing beekeepers. And I think for most surveys, I'm not sure about the Washington State survey, but queen failure is usually in the top 2, top 3 behind Varroa and viruses. And so it is a major issue facing beekeepers and something I've been interested in. Now, like you mentioned, during my master's degree, I was really focused on nutrition and queen quality, really largely focused on, the queens are failing. If there's something wrong with the queens, it must be some sort of aspect of the queen that's the issue, right? But we kind of forget about the drones, even though the drones are extremely important and really largely impactful for the queen, but yet we don't know much about the drones at all. I mean, when I ask beekeepers, when you think about a healthy colony, nobody ever thinks about the drones or raises their hands, even though, I mean, they are half the equation. And so throughout this talk, I'm going to talk about my PhD research focus on the drones, and really hopefully by the end you realize that drones are really important, and we should start thinking about drones when you think about queen failure issues and queen quality altogether. But before I begin, I'd like to give a little primer on, what a drone is, a social colony. I never know the type of experience level beekeepers have in these groups. And so, when you think about a honeybee colony, right, there's 5 to 10,000 individuals within a colony. Now, most are females, and that includes the queen, which is this top picture, and she is the primary reproductive of the colony, right? So she lays, 2,000 eggs per day, and that's her only role, is to, mate and then lay eggs for the entirety of her life. The rest are made up of these non-reproductive females called workers, and these workers perform a wide range of tasks. They go from guarding to foraging to nursing behavior. So they perform all these really important tasks within a colony. But then we have these giant drones, and I've been trying to look into this, but I think the origin of the name drone comes from just their really low buzzing sound, that droning sound. And that's where kind of the background of the drone name comes from. But that's why beekeepers kind of give this unique name to males. Now, these drones, they're large, about the same size as the queen, and they have these giant beady eyes that allow them to go on these multiple mating flights. They have these large thoraxes, which are just compact with these huge muscles that allow them to go on these multiple mating flights, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And then they have the abdomen area, which is packed with their reproductive tract. Now, throughout the season, it kind of depends on the type of colony you have, for example, the genetic stock or your region, but the colony can have up to 20% of their colony members drones. And so if you have a colony that's 10,000 bees, then you could have a few hundred drones within a colony at a time. And I'm not sure about your region right now. I guess your colonies might be starting to produce drones, probably not quite yet, but I'd say probably next month your colonies will start producing drones pretty soon. But yeah, this is exactly what a drone looks like. Now, in the beginning talk, I really focus on this queen failure issue. So, when we look at a lot of these surveys, when you survey beekeepers on, what are the issues facing your colonies, and this is pretty consistent with both background beekeepers to stationary beekeepers, commercial beekeepers, where queen failure is really near the top of the list. And a lot of them are reporting that these queens are failing within 6 months. Now, a lot of research has really been focused on the queen aspect of failure, right? If the queen is failing, or if there's some kind of queen quality issue, there must be something wrong with the queen. And so a lot of research has really been focused on, the queen, but we're starting to realize that drones, or the males, really play a more important role to queen quality and queen failure than we originally expected. We're seeing that actually a lot of these queens are being linked to, poor sperm quality and poor drone quality altogether. And so this is a really major issue, yet there's not a lot of research behind drones and what makes a high quality drone. And so my research is really, focused on, really understand the biology of drones, like why do some colonies produce high versus low quality drones, and what can we do to really improve the drone quality? And so first, drones contribute to queen quality and queen failure in a few different ways, or colony health in a few different ways. First is drones can directly contribute to queen failure and queen quality. And so this was a really cool study done by Dr. Jeffrey Pettis, and at the time he was at the USDA ARS in Maryland, and he was hearing these same reports. And so in around 2016, 2015, he collected queens that were failing in the East Coast, the West Coast, and he compared them to queens that weren't failing within the study or research apiary in Maryland. And so he looked at this metric called sperm viability. And so if you look at the queen, she stores sperm in this sperm storage organ called the spermatheca. And she stores that sperm and she uses for the rest of her life, because the queen only mates, for the first week or so once she emerges. And after that, she stores that sperm and uses it to lay her 2,000 eggs per day for, 2 to 4 years where she should be. So this researcher collected sperm that's stored in the spermatheca and looked at, okay, what percentage of sperm was alive versus dead? And so he found from the research apiary that the sperm was nearly 80 to 90% alive. And so that's a really good sign, right? The queen should be storing sperm that is really mostly alive and mostly viable. But for the queens that were failing in the East Coast, the West Coast, I can't give you specifics where they were located, but these are beekeepers on each coast. And he found that the sperm was nearly 50% dead. So the queen was storing sperm that was 50% alive and 50% dead. Now this could be potentially a queen issue, right? Maybe it's some issue with her actually storing the sperm, but it could also be the mates that she's mating with. So if queens are mating with drones that are producing low viable or poor sperm quality, then that's the type of sperm that she's going to be storing. And so this does suggest that drones are playing a really important role to queen failure and queen quality altogether. Second, drones are really important for not only queen quality and queen success, but also for overall colony success. And so I think in terms for, if you think about a colony level trait, whether that's some kind of rural defense behavior, honey production, or just general health and survival, we think about genetics of the queen or aspects of the queen. But drones, 50% of the genetics for a colony and 50% of what makes up a colony is actually due to the drones. And so even though we may attribute a lot of these things to the queen, the drones play a really, really important role. And so, queen will mate with, 15 to 20 drones. And so those drones genetics are really dispersed throughout the colony. And this is really important for a lot of these type of traits that you as a beekeeper are really interested in. And so that includes mite resistance, such as hygienic behavior, rural sensitive hygiene, some of these traits that we know have importance for low rural levels. We know it's important for viral resistance, productivity, different landscapes, and then just overall colony performance and colony health. And so if you take anything away from here, just think that, drones aren't really this forgotten sex. They're really important for not only, queen quality and queen success, but also important for all these other colony level traits that, you as a beekeeper are interested in. Okay, so, before I began my research, I really had to identify like what actually makes a successful drone. And I could really separate this into, these three major categories. Point number one is sperm production. Point number two is sexual maturity. And then point number three is mating behavior. And so I'll use these, really 3 points throughout the rest of my talk. And so a drone lifespan takes around 54 days. And, it can go up to 70 days to 80 days, but on average, a drone lifespan is around 54 days. The first 24 days are in this developmental period. And what this basically means, it goes from egg to the kind of larval grub stage, and then to the pupa stage, which is pictured here. And so this development is about 24 days. And just to compare this to a worker and queen, queens are 16 days and workers are 21 days. And so they actually developed for an additional 3 days. Now, these additional days are really important because this is actually where sperm production is occurring for these drones. And so really, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but what's really interesting about honeybees and honeybee drones is sperm production only occurs during kind of 3 to 4 day window during development. And after that, 3 to 4 day window, they can never produce sperm ever again. And so this point is extremely important for male fertility and male sperm quality altogether. And so, sperm production is only occurring during this kind of short window. Point number 2 is sexual maturity. And so once drones emerge as adults, they actually spend, around the first 10 to 14 days in the middle of the brood nest. And so, if you're a beginner beekeeper, you have a colony, and usually in the middle frames of the colony, that is where all the brood is. So that's where the queen is laying the eggs. That's where the capped brood is. That's where all the developing larvae is. And this is where the drones hang out at, because this is where all the young nurse bees are. And this is where they receive this constant care by the workers. And so when I say care, this means that they're receiving food from the workers. They're receiving warmth from the workers. They're receiving all these different things from the workers. Because they need to do that in order to reach sexual maturity. And so this stage is extremely important. And one thing to know about drones, especially during this age, is they're really dependent on the workers. I mean, they can't even feed for themselves. During some of my research, I actually brought some drones into the incubator, and they don't survive very well in the incubator without workers, especially during these first 10 to 14 days. And so they're really dependent on the workers. But this is important because the workers really help them, reach sexual maturity. And once they reach sexual maturity, they go on these multiple mating flights. And, like I mentioned in the beginning, they're in the brood, on the brood frame, sitting here with the nurse bees. Once they reach sexual maturity, they're actually kicked to the edge of the colony. And so on the edge of the colony, that's where the bees tend to store the honey, or they're pushed up to the honey supers if there are honey supers. And they do this because the drones actually need to switch from a high protein diet, which they're receiving from the workers, to a high sugary diet in order to go on these really highly energetic, mating flights. And so drone will basically go on multiple mating flights per day until either the drone mates with the queen or dies trying. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the mating behavior of the drones, but drones will go on, 7 to 8 flights per day. These flights last around 30 minutes, and they go to these areas known as drone congregation areas. And I have a really good video of that, but they're basically these giant areas that are just populated by 1,000 to 10,000 drones, and the drones just really sit there until a queen arrives, and then they form these massive comets and chase after the queen during these mating flights. And so when you think about what actually makes a successful drone and how this could potentially contribute to queen quality and queen success, we can really separate these into 3 major points. One is the drone's ability to produce sperm, the drone's ability to reach sexual maturity, and then the drone's mating behavior altogether. So the first point is sperm is only produced during development. And so if you're a beginner beekeeper and you're not really familiar with the developmental stages of honeybees, they go through what is known as a holometabolous development. And this basically means that they go through these multiple stages of development, kind of like a butterfly, where they start from the egg, they become this grub, this larval stage, they spin a cocoon, and then they enter this pupa stage. And so they're going from this really different stage from a larval development to a pupa development, where those 2 stages are totally different. Now, once the egg is laid for a drone, if it's unfertilized, and the egg develops for around 3 days, and it hatches into a young larva. And the young larvae are they're really small, right? You can barely see them with your eyes, and they basically look like a kind of a grain of rice. But this stage is really important for drones because this is when the testes for the drones are first formed. Now, for the next 5 days, the larva gets bigger, bigger, and bigger until they get to the stage where, they're still in this larva stage, but they're huge. I mean, it looks like, if you had a chance this summer when your colonies begin to produce drones, it almost looks like the drone larvae don't even fit inside the cell because they're so huge. But this stage is probably the most important stage for a drone because this is when sperm is first formed for drones, and we call this spermatogenesis stage number 1. And so this is the first day when sperm is first produced. And once drones enter what is known as the prepupa stage, and this is when they kind of get this upright structure, this upright form, and then this is when they actually start spinning cocoon. Now, you can't really see the cocoon, but they are spinning cocoon because they begin to transform their entire body and their organs into what we kind of see with a drone. But this is really important because this is spermatogenesis number 2. And so sperm production really only occurs during this 2 to 3 day window. And if anything happens during this 2 to 3 day window, that can really compromise drones and really cause irreparable damage to drones where they could really never recover. Next, drones go into this kind of pupation stage. And so once they transform their entire body, their tissues are beginning to form, as you can see from this graphic. You can kind of see this pupa stage where, you know, there's still kind of this translucent white color, but you can see that their full body is formed. Now, this is when the tail for the drone is fully formed. And so sperm is produced during these first 2 days, these 2 to 3 day windows, and then the actual sperm tail is formed during this kind of pink-eyed, purple-eyed stage. And so, you know, this stage is extremely important. Now, if you're beginning a beekeeper, the one thing to think about with mite treatments is, you know, drones are just mite magnets. And so if you've ever put drone comb into a colony, or if you open up a drone cell that's capped, you can see that they're usually, if your colonies are really infested with mites, that they're full of mites. And so just kind of think about what type of damage that can actually cause to drones. And so mites are jumping into the cells, feeding on the fat body of the larva and transmitting deadly viruses. This can actually impair drones permanently. And so, and this includes other environmental things, right, such as treatments and things like that, which I'll go more into. But just remember that this stage is extremely important, but also extremely sensitive to a lot of these environmental things that the colony is exposed to. Next is sexual maturity. And so, like I mentioned, once drones emerge as adults, they spend the first 2 to 3 days, or first 10 to 14 days in the middle of the brood box. And that's because they're receiving constant care by the workers. Now, what's really unique about honeybees is sexual maturity isn't tied to the initiation of sperm production. So when you think about, you know, these closely related insects or even closely related bees, where sperm production is what causes sexual maturity. For drones, sexual maturity is tied to kind of the sperm movement and sperm swimming. And so to explain that a little bit more, when drones emerge as adults, all the sperm is stored in this organ called the testes. And then once they emerge as adult, the sperm actually has to swim to the seminal vesicles in order to be used during mating. And so unlike sexual maturity being tied to sperm production, it's actually tied to the sperm swimming to the seminal vesicles. Now, once the sperm actually swims there, then it can actually be used during mating and inseminated into the queens. Now, if you get a chance, you can tell if a drone is mature or immature. And so, you know, this summer when your colonies begin to produce drones, if you take them and you just squeeze on their thorax, their endophallus, which is the structure, will pop out, and you can tell whether a drone is mature or immature, whether they have sperm at the tip of the endophallus. And so here is an immature drone. You can see this clear structure of the endophallus, and you see at the tip there's no white mucus proteins and there's no brown sperm at the tip of the endophallus. Whereas mature drone, you can see that, you know, this is in the best picture. You can probably look at some better ones online. But you can see the brown sperm at the tip of the endophallus. And so this means that this drone, for example, is mature, whereas this drone is immature. And once drones reach sexual maturity, I guess they're kind of out of this teenage stage where they're really dependent on workers for everything. And so once they reach sexual maturity, the workers actually kick them to the outskirts of the colony so they can switch to a high sugary diet. And the workers seem to play a really important role in this. So for example, if a drone is lower quality, and so we've done some studies where we've actually impaired the drone by putting amitraz or some chemical treatments on the drones to make them, you know, lower quality, and the workers will actually give them more care. And so they'll actually jump on the drones and, you know, give these vibrational signals, so they get more feed care, they get more tropholaylax, because the workers can actually sense whether they're, you know, low quality and they actually need more care. But once they are, they actually kick to the outskirts of colonies and they're forced to really feed on themselves. And at this point, they go really on these multiple mating flights, and they do this until they, you know, either mate with a queen or they die trying. And this can take, you know, 24 to, and I've seen drones flying for, you know, 50 to 60 days. And so they can fly for a long period of time. And they go on these multiple mating flights and they last around 30 to, you know, 40 minutes at a time. And they go to these areas known as drone congregation areas, or DCAs. And these DCAs are heavily populated by drones. And so these DCAs can have, 1,000 to, upwards of 25,000 drones in these areas. And it kind of looks like just a swarm. The drones are just flying in an area, and they're waiting for a queen to arrive. And then once a queen arrives, it's kind of this, they form this drone comet and chase after the queen. And the queen only mates with 15 to 20. And so you can imagine how competitive this environment actually is. And so I'll talk a little bit more about this. I have a really cool video illustrating this a little bit, but this mating behavior is really unique to honeybees, and so a really cool behavior to observe. Okay, so when you think about what causes a poor drone and how this could contribute to queen quality, we can really separate this into these three major points. One is sperm production during development. Two is sexual maturity during the first 2 weeks, and then mating behavior after the drone actually reaches sexual maturity. And so first, what actually can cause a poor drones at these three different stages? The first are some of these environmental factors. And so, I've outlined here 5 that I think are probably the most important and the ones that contribute the most to poor drones. And there's some really cool review on it by Juliana Rangel, some really cool studies on this, but we know that, poor nutrition can cause poor drones. And so if your colony enters a pollen dearth, or if your colonies aren't properly fed or don't have the right nutrients, for example, if they're feeding on a monoculture, for example, this can cause production of poor drones. 2 are some of these pest pathogen diseases. And so this includes Varroa destructor, viruses, some brood diseases such as American foulbrood, European foulbrood. All these can contribute to poor drones, miticides. And so there's a wide range of different miticides you can use for your mite treatments. And so they range from synthetic miticides such as amitraz to organic miticides such as oxalic acid or formic acid. And so, they all have some effect on the drones. Like, we know that synthetic miticides such as amitraz has the largest effect on drones and really can cause sterile drones altogether. But even treatments such as oxalic acid and formic acid, while a much lesser effect, still can cause an impaired drones to some extent. 4 are these pesticides. And so we live in, I live in Indiana. And so we're in this kind of high agronomic environment where, insecticides are used pretty prominent, especially neonicotinoids. And you guys live in areas that are pretty close to fungicides and some of these other treatments. And we know that these can cause really massive damage on drones. And then finally, temperature. We're learning that temperature plays a really important role. And so this can be caused by, changes in climate, or it can be caused by just, these fluctuations in heat during the summer. And so if you have a really hot day, this can really impair drones altogether. The other thing is genetic factors. And so when you think about a trait, we can split between the environment, but we also think about these genetic factors. And just to kind of explain genetics a little bit more, because that's what I'll be kind of focusing on. I want you to think about sort of a normal distribution where, let's say we sample 100 random colonies, and we look at, drone traits from these 100 random colonies. We'll tend to get this distribution where some colonies will produce high quality drones, some colonies produce low quality drones, and there'll be a lot in the middle. Now, this can be due to environmental factors, but there could be certain genes that causes colonies to produce high quality drones versus low quality drones. And, for me, I was really interested in, okay, what genes and what genetic networks actually cause the production of high quality drones? Because if we can actually identify those genes, we can use them in a breeding program. So, for example, we can, screen colonies for the genetics and use that to identify, the best colonies for this trait of interest. And so, I'm currently at the USDA in Baton Rouge, and, we've been selecting for some of these rural defense behaviors, but we're starting to see that, if we're selecting for, yield or VSH, for example, that this has a negative effect on male fertility. And so trying to understand how to not only breed for, these rural defense behaviors and honey yield, which beekeepers are really interested in, which they should be, but how can we also improve some of these fertility traits? And so I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but we can think about genetics as a really important factor for drones and something that we can use to improve drone quality altogether. Okay, so first we're going to focus on, this point number 1, sperm quality. So once again, just kind of summarize once again, sperm is only produced during development during this 2 to 3 day window, and occurs during this late larval instar when the drone larvae are really huge and they seem to be kind of overflowing from the cell. And then stage number 2 is when they're actually capped in this cocoon spinning stage. And so sperm is only produced during these two to three days development. And then the sperm tail is formed when they reach this pink-eyed purple-eyed stage. And so once a drone actually emerges from their cell, they have all the sperm they could ever use during adulthood, and they can never produce sperm ever again. And so that's why some of these environmental factors are really important, because if they occur during this stage, it can cause really irreparable damage to the drones, because they can never produce sperm ever again. So I really had two major questions. One is, beekeepers are buying these stocks, these commonly used stocks from across the country. And one question is, how much do these stocks vary in some of these drone reproductive traits? And so, that was sort of my first question. Two is, how much do genetics actually play a role? And can we actually find the genes that contribute to, high quality drones versus low quality drones? And to answer that question, we did what is known as a common garden experiment. And so, first off, as a geneticist, we hate the environment, makes everything messy and really hard to find, these really important genes. And so what we do is we bring these different stocks or different lines from across the country and bring them to one environment. And so, we can never get rid of the environment altogether, but we can control to their best ability. And so we can bring these lines into one environment and really control for the forage that they're bringing in. We can control for the type of treatments that are applied. We can control for really different environment, but most important, we can control the drones so they're treated exactly the same. And so we started with around 10 different lines. And so these lines are chosen based on first their genetic ancestry. And so we did genetic testing on some of these colonies and found what proportion of their genes were attributed, were Africanized, or what proportion of genes were of Italian lineages or Carniolan. So, for example, down south, the bees tend to have a higher proportion of Africanized genes, whereas on the West Coast and the East Coast, bees tend to have a higher proportion of genes that are from Italian background or Carniolan background. And so that was our first way to find differences, basically. Our second was based on, beekeeper selection practices. And so, there's a lot of breeding programs across the United States. And so at Purdue, for example, we have our mite biting behavior program. We're selecting for bees that actually, find the mites and chew their legs off. We have the VSH line, which is at the USDA ARS in Baton Rouge, where we're breeding for this really rural hygienic behavior where the bees can actually sense the mites in the cell and remove bees and mites that way. And then we're also choosing based on some of these kind of general breeding programs, such as, Saskatraz, which I'm not sure if you guys might dabble in that a little bit. We chose, Russian, some of these other breeding programs. And so we started with, 10 of them. And we found that 4 produce widely differences in some of these drone traits. And so I'm not gonna tell you exactly what these lines are, just to make sure the beekeepers are anonymous, because this research is still really early on. We found that line 1, 2, 3, and 4 produced high versus low quality drones. And so we raised drones in these 4 different colonies. And then once they emerged as adults, we looked at drone traits at ages 10, 14, and 20. Because what's really cool about drones is they go with what is known as reproductive senescence, where drone quality is really low at early ages. It increases, and drone quality is really maximized at this age 14. And then just due to natural aging or flight or oxidative stress, the sperm quality decreases over time. And so we really see this consistent trend with drones where it goes under this really normal curve. And this really makes sense because at age 10, right, that sperm is still migrating and moving so the drones can reach sexual maturity. And so we expect that sperm quality to be really low. And then once it's fully moved and fully kind of stored in the seminal vesicles, then the drones are at this maximum reproductive age. And then just aging, decreases over time. And so we wanted to capture this entire curve. And then we measured a wide range of fertility traits because we don't really know what traits are important for a drone and what traits that we as researcher and you as beekeeper who are interested in this type of trait should be looking for. And so we looked for 25 to 30 different traits related to sperm. And so we looked at the sperm viability, so what proportion of the sperm was actually alive versus dead. The sperm movement, so how fast was the sperm swimming. We looked at the raw number of sperm that the drones were producing. And so I'm not going to show all of them, but really the biggest takeaway here is that sperm number, the amount of sperm that the drone is actually producing, is the best indicator of drone fertility, and it's actually correlated to all these different traits. And so if you're interested in sperm viability, sperm number is a good way to predict that type of trait. And so throughout this talk, I'll be focused on, sperm number, but just remember that it is correlated to a lot of these other sperm traits that you may read or hear about from other researchers. Okay, so here are the first results. And so here are 4 different lines, line 1, 2, 3, and 4. And these are the drone ages. And so we measure drones at ages 10, 14, and 20, right? Because we want to capture that entire senescence. And then we looked at the number of sperm drones are producing. And so most drones produce, what we found was from 2 upwards to 12 million sperm cells. And so that was kind of our range, but most are around kind of this 4 to 6 million sperm cell range. And so I really want you to focus on this highlighted green line, so line 1 and line 4. Now, what's unique about these is first, we see this senescence curve where sperm is really low at age 10, increases at 14, and then decreases, and we see the exact same trend for line 4. Now, what's interesting is the significant differences, especially at age 14 between line 1 and line 4. So, I mean, line 1 drones are producing 2 to 3 million more sperm cells than line 4. Now, just remember this, these drones are treated exactly the same. They received the same treatments. They were raised in the exact same environment, yet these drones are producing, 2 to 3 times more sperm than, this line. And so what this suggests is that, while we can't control for all the environmental factors, this likely indicates that, some genetics are playing a really, really important role for some of these drone fertility traits. And so in order to look at how much genetics plays a role, we looked at what is known as a heritability score. And so if you're not familiar with a heritability score, it ranges from 0 to 1. 1 means that a trait is determined 100% by genetics. And so a good example of that would be, eye color. We know there's certain genes that cause a person to have green eyes versus blue eyes versus hazel eyes. A heritability of 0 would mean that this trait is determined primarily by the environment and genetics don't play a role at all. And we found that 33% of this, what we're seeing, is due to genetics. Now, while this seems really low because, well, there's still 70%, Garrett, right? I mean, environment must be playing a really important role. But this heritability is actually really high for a trait like this. And so when we compare this to, other livestock or other industries, heritability for a sperm trait like this is usually, 0.15, 0.25. And so this is actually a really high heritability. And so the biggest takeaway from this is, we see a lot of variation in some of these commonly used stocks that you as a beekeeper use. And a lot of this is determined by genetics. And so they're playing a really, really important role to this variation we're seeing, especially between line 1 and line 4. Now, we didn't want to stop there, right? We first want to identify variation and whether genetics are playing a role. But we want to see, okay, what genes are actually causing this variation? Because if we can identify specific genes that cause a high quality drone versus a low quality drone, we can use this in sort of a selected breeding program to improve this trait. And so we did what is known as a gene network analysis. And I'm not going to get too much in detail because it's really not important. But what we did was we looked at genes that were expressed in the gonads, and we identified genes that were correlated to some of these sperm traits. And so what genes are really important for sperm production? And so we found that there's about 1,200 genes associated with some of these sperm traits, and they're usually in what is known as a network. And so if you're not familiar with genetics, what genes are in this kind of really complicated network where there's usually genes on the outskirts that they have a small effect on the trait, but not too much. But there's usually a gene right in the middle that's kind of regulating all these genes. And these are usually the genes of interest that are associated with that trait. And this is a gene that we want to identify to use in a breeding program. And so we pulled up the gene and we want to see what is this gene and what is it actually doing. So first off, we found that we looked at expression of this gene for drones that are producing high amounts of sperm versus low amounts of sperm. And we see that there's a significant higher expression of this gene. And we found this gene was known as dynein. Now, if you're not familiar with kind of the anatomy or the biology of sperm have a head, and that's where the nucleus is formed. And so when the head binds to the nucleus, this is where the DNA is being transported. There's this mid piece right here, and that's essentially the motor for the sperm. And then we have the tail, which is a rudder. And you can think about this as sort of a boat where the head is sort of the boat structure, the dynein is the motor, and then the tail is the rudder. Now, what we're seeing is that the drones that aren't producing high quality or high amounts of sperm, this has lower expression of this dynein protein. And so what this basically means is that these drones are low quality because something's happening to the sperm motor, whether it's a lack of spark plugs or whether it's a lack of gas or lack of oil. Like something's happening to the sperm motor that's not allowing the sperm to swim properly. And so this seems to be playing a really important role for why we're seeing some colonies produce these high quality drones versus low quality drones. And so just remember this throughout the talk, because we'll be connecting this a little bit later, but just remember that dynein is the sperm motor, and it essentially is the functionality for the sperm swimming. Okay, so the first part of the talk was looking at sperm quality. Next is looking at sexual maturity. And so just kind of summarize sexual maturity once again. Once drones emerge as adults, they produce all the sperm they will ever use for the rest of their life, and it's stored in the testes. But in order for a drone to actually reach sexual maturity, the sperm actually has to swim to the seminal vesicles. Now, just to kind of tie this into the previous slide, we found that the drones that aren't producing high amounts of sperm, those sperm don't seem to be swimming properly. Now, what can that mean? Now, if the sperm aren't swimming properly, that could mean that there could be sperm that aren't properly swimming or aren't swimming at all from the seminal vesicles to the seminal vesicles. And so, for example, a drone may produce, let's say, 8 million sperm cells during development, but if only 4 million sperm cells, or if none of the sperm cells swim altogether, then drones may have actually less sperm they can use during mating. And, let's say the sperm doesn't swim at all. That means the drones may never reach sexual maturity and may just be kind of stuck in this immature stage. And so next question was, how can we tie what we're seeing from the previous slide to some of these sexual maturity traits? And so we looked at sexual maturity by basically popping the drones. And so you can do this in your colonies when your colonies begin producing drones, just squeeze on the drones and their endophallus will typically pop out. And from there, you can see whether a drone is immature versus mature. And basically, a drone is mature when they have kind of this brown kind of solution and this white solution at the tip of the endophallus. And so this is how we mark whether a drone was immature versus mature. And so the next question was, okay, we're seeing a lot of variation in some of these sperm traits. Are we actually seeing variation in sexual maturity? And so once again, we did this same common garden experiment where we had our 4 distinct lines and we raised them in a central location in Indiana. And so exact same experiment design. And so I explained how we chose these 4 lines, and these are the exact same 4 lines. And so we raised drones in these 4 lines, and we looked at the percent of drones that were sexually mature at these 3 different ages. And so at age 10, 14, and 20. And really how we marked mature drones was just simply by popping the drones and seeing what proportion of drones were mature versus immature. Now we had a few expectations when we got into this, we jumped into this. First was, for the first 10 to 14 days, this is when drones are reaching sexual maturity. And so there should be probably a smaller portion of drones that are mature at age 14, but really by age 14, when drones really maximize their fertility, this is when nearly 100% of the drones should be sexually mature. And really by age 20, all the drones should be sexually mature. And so if, drones aren't sexually mature by this age 20 state, I mean, it's, we're still doing more research into it, but if drones aren't reaching sexual maturity by this state, that could possibly mean that drones may never reach sexual maturity and may just really be forever sterile. And so we really expected that most drones should be sexual maturity at least by age 20. And so I'm going to really focus on age 20 versus 10 to 14 because we see this similar trend. But like I said, we really expected that most drones should be sexual maturity at least by age 20. Now, these are exact same 4 lines that we saw from the previous slide, where line 1 drones produce the most amount of sperm and line 4 drones produce the least amount of sperm. But we see this actually also connected to sexual maturity. And so for line 1, 75% of the drones were sexually mature, whereas for line 4, only around 33% of these drones were sexually mature. And so this is concerning for a few different reasons. One is, these drones are raised in the exact same environment, treated exactly the same, yet these drones from line 1 are not only producing the most sperm, but most of these drones are mature, whereas drones from line 4, they're producing less sperm and a high proportion of drones aren't mature. And then also, Jones, if 70% of these Jones aren't mature at this stage, then it's, this is something we to look more into, but potentially these Jones may never reach sexual maturity altogether and just may be forever sterile. And so this is a really interesting finding and really concerning finding that, these Jones were treated the same, but yet, these 70% of these Joneses never reached sexual maturity at this age. And so, this could be due to some experimental design issues, but regardless, it's still concerning because these Jones were treated exactly the same. Now, first we see, there's a lot of variation. Next thing is, how much does genetics play a role in this? So we did the heritability analysis, and I don't have it right here, but the heritability was around 40%. And so this trait is highly heritable. And so, basically what that means is there's a high potential to breed and select for improvement for this trait. Okay, so next we want to see, we see that there's a lot of variation in sexual maturity, and we also see that it's highly heritable. Next we want to see, what genes are causing, drones from line 1 to produce a lot of immature drones. And so once again, we looked at expression in the gonads, but we also looked at expression in the brain. Now, what's interesting about this finding is we actually didn't find many genes in the gonads that were associated with sexual maturity. Actually, sexual maturity was tied to expression in the brain. And that sort of makes sense because in order for a drone to begin these mating flights, they had to go through these behavioral and physiological changes in the brain in order for them to go from this state where they're dependent on the workers in the middle of the colony to a state where they have to switch to a high sugary diet and go on these multiple mating flights. And so, I think that was kind of an interesting finding that sexual maturity is tied more towards expression in the brain rather than the gonads. Now, once again, we found 800 genes that were associated with sexual maturity, and we found that there's one gene of interest that seems to be playing a really important role for mature versus immature drones. And so we pulled out the gene, and our question was like, what is this gene and what is it actually doing? And so we see that drones that were immature have lower expression of this gene, significantly lower expression of this gene than drones that were mature. And so it seems to be playing an important role for sexual maturity for drones. And we found that this gene was known as RAS32. And you have to know the exact name of this protein, but you can think about this as sort of a UPS truck driver. This UPS truck driver collects cargo, collects all these nutrients, collects all these things that the sperm needs, and it actually transports it to the sperm motor, the dynein. And so let's say the sperm isn't swimming properly because the motor isn't getting gas or spark plugs or is a lack of oil. That could be possibly due to either the lack of truck drivers or the truck drivers just aren't getting there. And so this was a really cool finding because we're seeing that this is interconnecting where sexual maturity is tied to some behavioral changes in the brain or the production of truck drivers. These truck drivers are driving to the sperm and transporting these nutrients. And so these seem to be connected to each other. And so when you think about why these drones aren't producing good sperm or why these drones aren't reached sexual maturity, there's possibly something happening in the system, whether it's at the truck driver stage or the sperm motor stage. So next question is, okay, we see the expression in the brain, we see the expression in the testes, and they seem to be really important for sperm swimming. But the question is, how do we get from, these UPS drivers, how do they, basically drive all the way to the sperm to transport these nutrients? And so what we did was we pulled out genes that were shared between these, and we found that there's one gene that was really highly interconnected between these two different types of traits. And so we pulled that gene, we found it was known as buccal D, and this is really the highway for transporting UPS drivers. And so you can think about this as, like the interstate. It's like this protein that, takes the UPS drivers and transports them all the way to the reproductive tract and allows these UPS drivers to actually transport nutrients to the sperm. And so when you think about what causes poor drones and poor sperm quality, you have to remember all these genes, you have to remember like all these different networks because it's really not important, but there's something happening at one of these 3 stages that's preventing drones from, being high quality, whether that's at the UPS driver stage, so the lack of production of UPS drivers, or the tires are popping, whether that's at the highway stage where the highway is under construction or there's potholes, or whether at the sperm stage where the sperm motor for the boat isn't working because it's not getting those nutrients. And so something's happening at these stages that's preventing drones from reaching sexual maturity. Now, what's cool about the study is we identify these really important genes, and we can use this to breed for really better bees that produce better drones. Okay, so the first 2 points are really focused on sperm quality and sexual maturity, and these are probably arguably the 2 most important types of traits for a drone. But third is mating behavior. We really can't forget about mating behavior, because the drones can produce the highest quality and the highest amounts of sperm, but if a drone can't mate with a queen or doesn't have those type of traits that allow it to mate with a queen, then it's gonna be low quality also. And so just to kind of summarize mating behavior once again. So once drones reach sexual maturity, they're kicked to the outskirts of colony, and they feed on a high sugary diet. And they go to these areas known as DCAs, or drone congregation areas, and they're heavily populated with drones, 1,000 to 25,000 drones. And talk a little bit more about that. And I have a really cool video kind of illustrating that. So let me play this. So here is a queen with a queen pheromone, and you see all these drones are kind of flying around this this queen pheromone. And so this is a DCA, but you see all the drones are competing with each other for the queen. And so this is probably a kind of a smaller DCA, but they can be quite a bit larger. We can see all the drones is right here, and they get really hyperactive once they kind of find the queen. And there's some really cool videos online too showing this behavior. Where they have the queen up there, and you can see the drones actually kind of knocking each other out of the way. They're really fighting for each other for queen access. Now, once a drone actually latches onto a queen and starts mating, what happens is the queen and the drone really become paralyzed, because the drone is inseminating the queen, and they actually fall about 4 to 5 meters from the air. And so you have some really cool videos of this, but once the mating's actually occurring, the drone and the queen are flying or falling through the air. And then once the mating process is actually done, the whole reproductive tract of the drone is ripped out, and the drone falls to its death. And so a drone can only mate once during their lifespan. And so they really have to make it count. And once they mate, they can never mate again, because the whole reproductive tract is really ripped out of their system. And so it's a really vicious process, but it's a really unique mating behavior. Let's see. And just talk a little bit more about some of these DCAs and some of the drone mating behavior. This was a really cool study done in Puerto Rico, and they've done some really cool studies, not only tracking where the DCAs are, but tracking some of the drone mating behavior. And what they do is they put these little antennas on the back of the drones, and they can track where the drones are going. And so it's a really hard and complicated process, because you need like 3 to 4 people to actually triangulate where the drones are going. But it's powerful because you can actually locate where the drones are going. You can see how many DCAs are going to and how long they're staying at the DCAs. And so here is the study plot, and these triangles are the different apiary locations. And so these are the locations where they actually track the drones. And then these squares, which hopefully you guys are able to see that, but these squares are the actual drone congregation areas. And so even though on this map there's 30 apiary locations, there's only 4 to 5 of these drone congregation areas. And so there's really not many, and it seems like the drones are going to some of these DCAs. What they also found is that these drones, especially when they first start flying, they go on sort of these orientation flights. So kind of like a worker, where they go on these orientation flights to find the best floral sources. The drones actually go on similar orientation flights to find the best drone congregation areas. And so, for the first 2, 3, 4 days, the drones will probably go to multiple of these congregation areas. But once they get older and mating becomes more urgent, because their sperm quality is getting lower and their, I guess, probability of mating gets lower, then they tend to go to one DCA and go back and forth between them. But I really like this graph, because it really shows that there's really not many DCAs, and the drones seem to be going to really similar areas. So we looked at some of these sperm traits, but we also want to look at, okay, how much do these flight traits vary? And so, beekeepers are using these commonly used stocks. We see that there's a lot of variation, a lot due to genetics with these stocks. Now, is there also variation in some of these flight traits? And so we raised drones in these 4 different colonies, and we put RFID tags on the back of the drones. And so I think I marked 2,000 to 4,000 drones, and they're these really small RFID takes, and they're really lightweight. They don't impact the flight of the drone. It was some really long nights actually marking these drones, but it takes a really long time. Well, good thing about drones, they don't really move much, and they're larger than workers, and so it made it a lot easier. But so this technology, it's not a GPS tracker, right? So we don't know exactly where the drones are going, but this information allows us it tells us a lot of information about some of the flight behavior. And so we put like a tracker in the front of the colony, and so it tells us when a drone leaves and comes back from the colony. And so while it doesn't tell us exactly all the mating behavior, so exactly where the drones are going, it tells us how long they're flying, how many flights per day, when they actually begin flying. And so it gives a lot of this really interesting flight data that we can, correlate to some of this mating behavior. And so here's an example of a drone I tracked. And so you can see that for the first 3 days, the drones aren't flying at all. And then around 4 or 5 days, the drone, began flying for around 30 minutes per day. There's an uptick for around 35 minutes. And then on this day, around 15 to 16 days, I believe, the drone wasn't flying because it was raining that day. And so the drone couldn't fly. And so it gives some really cool information about some of this flight behavior that the drones have. And so we first looked at age of first flight. So when did the drones actually begin their first flight initially? And so here are the same 4 lines that we used for the previous analysis. And so just remember, drones from line 1 had the highest quality sperm, whereas drones from line 4 had the lowest quality sperm. And what's interesting is drones from line 1, they didn't begin their flight until around age 8, whereas drones from line 2, 3, and 4, they began around age 6. Now, so it seems like drones from line 1 are actually delaying flight by an additional 2 days. Now, 2 days is massive in a life of a drone. And so delaying two days is really interesting. And so one thing I hypothesize is that drones may be spending more time in the colony, receiving more care by the workers in order to improve their sperm quality. And so one reason that the drones from line 1 may be higher quality is because they could be receiving more care by the workers. Even though the workers were exactly the same for all these 4 lines, they could potentially give more care to these drones. And so that's something we need to look more into. Next, we looked at how many flights per day these drones are taking. And so drones from line 1, they're taking an average of 10 flights per day, 8 flights per day for line 2, and then around 6 flights per day for 3 and 4. And so we see a lot of really cool variation, not only some of these sperm traits, but also some of this flight behavior. So just to summarize, we see that these 3 points are really important for drones: sperm quality, sex maturity, and mating behavior. And we see that there's a ton of variation in all these traits among stocks and breeding lines that you as a beekeeper commonly use. And there seems to be certain genes that, cause the production of high versus low quality drones. Now, what does this actually mean? So in the beginning of the talk, I was really focused on queen quality and queen failure. And so this is, one of these major issues that beekeepers are facing, whether it's reported in surveys or, in your group, your beekeepers may be experiencing same queen failure issues. And so the next step is, how does poor drone quality contribute to queen failure? And so, we're seeing this production of low quality drones, and the next step is how can we connect this to poor queens? And so the next step is actually inseminating queens with some of these drones, these low quality drones, and seeing how that affects queen performance, whether that's egg laying, whether that's impacting her overproduction, all these different factors. And so that's going to be really the next part of my research. The next is performance may be based on location. And so before you, spread the word that drones are crappy and, some of these lines are producing low quality drones, just remember that this study was done in a common garden in Indiana. And so, let's say we repeat this study in, California or Texas or Florida. The drones from line 1 may actually outperform these different locations because, we can never reduce everything down to the genetics, right? There's still really intense environmental noise, right? So it's something to consider that, drones from line 1 may do really well in our central location, Indiana, but may not perform as well in these other locations. The last thing is, I guess your question may be, so we're seeing that some of these colonies are producing some of these low quality drones, and there seems to be a really intense genetic component. And so some of these stocks seem to be producing low quality drones. And so it could be due to breeding. And so one thing to consider is when you breed for production, or in the case of beekeepers, viral defense behavior, such as VSH, hygienic behavior, some of these other traits, this can actually be having a negative effect on fertility. And so this is an example done in dairy cattle where they tracked milk production over the past 6 years and then cow pregnancy rate, which is directly related to male fertility. And they see that as they're selecting for milk production over the past 6 years, this trend has been dramatically increasing, but the cow pregnancy rate has been decreasing slowly. And that's because these traits tend to be really connected to each other. And so, as beekeepers, we're interested in some of these really important traits for colony health and survival, such as grower defense behavior, or maybe from a business perspective, we're breeding for honey yield. Now, this could be having a negative effect on male fertility. Now, as a beekeeper, would I advise you to not select for those? No, because they're really important and really the major drivers of colony losses. But what we want to do is how can we select for not only some of these really important traits, but also select for increased male fertility. And so that's one of those kind of major considerations we're having going forward. And so, yeah, I just want to thank everybody at Purdue that helped me with my project, and then all my funding partners. And here's my email if you have any additional questions. But yeah, I'll open the floor to any questions. And I may have a few in the chat.
Let's see here.
Garrett, this is Michael. Can I ask you a question?
Yes, go for it.
Yeah, thanks so much for this fascinating talk. Back on your slide showing the graphs of the sperm quality, what actually caught my eye, I think it was line 2, where the best sperm quality was actually at time 20, which is when there's supposed to be senescence, as I recall. So I'm wondering, was that a true observation? Yeah, there it is. Was that a true observation that at time 20 you have the best sperm quality, and is that a genetic trait that you can exploit? Or
no, that's a really excellent point. And so, right, I mean, when you think about senescence, it's usually in this 10, 14 to 28 range. But what's interesting about this one, like you observed, the highest was at age 20. Now, so we stopped the experiment at age 20 just because it's hard to collect that many drones. But I do wonder if we sample these drones, 10 days later, that we'd see that senescence curve a bit later. And so it's possible that line 2, they may just age at a different rate, right? Their sexual maturity may be delayed compared to these other lines. And so that could be the same for line 3 also. If we delay the experiment for another week, they could senescence at a later date. And so we didn't explore that, but I think it'd be a cool thing to look at.
thank you.
Gabrielle?
Hi, this is Jill. As they're not, you are able to recommend bee breeders that have that are local to the Pacific Northwest that do have stable drone genetics.
So is your question, I guess what type of recommendations can we give to the bee breeders in your region, you mean? Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And so I think that's going to be the next step. And so what's cool about this study is, well, so first off, selecting for this type of trait is it's really hard, time consuming, and something I think the bee breeders in your region, really across the country, would be interested in, but it does take a lot of time, and you also have to age the drones. And so that's really a major impediment for this type of trait. And so one thing we want to do is, now that we have a list of genes that are really important for these traits, how can we go to these colonies and sample a few drones or sample a few workers and look at their genetics and do sort of a pre-screening tool. And so we're starting to do that pretty soon, where some of these pre-screening tools are really cheap, where we can sequence some of these genes for less than a few dollars a colony. And so if we can do that, that could be a really cheap and easy way for a beekeeper to breed for these. But currently, on a phenotype basis, it's really hard and complicated. And I don't have a lab to do some of these tests, but eventually, if we can start doing that, we can start integrating this to beekeepers across really the country.
How would a keeper get involved in assisting with some of that research?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah. Currently, I'm just a postdoc, but if beekeepers are interested, they can reach out to me. So I'm starting to think about how I can integrate this to beekeepers. So we're developing a lab to do some of this phenotyping and some of this pre-screening. And so there's probably another year off where we have this tool where a beekeeper could simply just send us bees and we could really look at the bees and see what type of drones they're producing and give that information back to the beekeepers. And so, yeah, if you're interested, you can just reach out to me and I can put them on a mailing list.
I have a question. So bee genetics and breeding for specific traits is so incredibly complicated because of all the alleles and everything. Isolating these qualities with healthy drones that have good sperm quality, does that fall into that same complexity of breeding?
Yeah. So like you mentioned, I mean, we can rarely reduce all traits down to just a few genes or a few alleles, for example. And so that makes it a little more complicated, and that's why it requires a little bit more research. But what we do know is that these genes are really important. And so even though we could screen for these few hundred genes, and we could still make the progress. And as we do that, we can gain more information about the genetics. But so early on, and so once you start selecting for some of these traits using some of these genes that we know or these genetic markers, I think there's high potential. But I mean, it has worked for hygienic behavior, for example. So we know that there's about 100 genes that's really highly associated with hygienic behavior, and we can select for those traits by simply selecting for the genetics. And so I think there's high potential for this, especially since this is really heritable.
And maybe instead of going out to the workers, since the drone is a direct line to the queen,
Exactly.
then it makes it a little easier to select.
No, that's a
Peter,
really good point. Let me see. I showed my chat.
Peter, one more. Peter and Amy Beth.
Hey, Don. And thank you, Garrett. I posted this in chat, but maybe you can read it in chat and I won't mangle words.
But questioning around, were the lines controlled for mite predation, and then how, and if so, then does Vitellogenic?
Okay. Yep, sorry, I could open chat. Okay, I have chat open now. Okay, so yeah, so that's a really good question because like I mentioned, I mean, drones are mite magnets, and so for this type of experiment, it's really hard to control for mites. And so, but we did the best of our ability. I mean, the mites were low, and the drones that were emerging didn't have mites on them. But one thing we did was in the beginning of the season, I guess we started with four frame nooks. And then we integrated sort of a brew break, and we did oxalic acid, because what we want to do was we wanted to prevent the use of any harsh chemical acaricides such as amitraz. And so even though amitraz is a really effective mite treatment, for this type of experiment, we wanted to kind of stay away from that for the best ability. And so what we started with was a few brew breaks in the spring, just to make sure that our mite levels are pretty clean at the beginning of the season. And then right before our actual experiment, we did a few more treatments of oxalic acid, including another drone brood removal, where we removed any additional drones. But during the experiment, we did do mite monitoring just to make sure that our mite levels were low. And so I mean, they're below 0.1, so they're practically low. And the drones that did emerge that we used for the experiment didn't emerge with mites, right? So we were also tracking that part. So, but yeah, I mean, these type of experiments, I mean, I'm talking about genetics, but imagine, adding the whole layer of some of these environmental factors such as mites to it. I mean, that could make things even more concerning.
Did you do any kind of, did you consider just the vitellogenin levels in the drones in the different lines at all, or not really of interest currently?
I think it's the interest of us, I guess, this coming season. And so vitellogenin is just a really important protein. I'm not sure how many beekeepers are aware of this, but it's associated with a lot of these different traits. It's also really important for kind of stress tolerance. And so that's gonna be a trait that we'll be looking for along with the drones this coming summer. But yeah, for this experiment, I didn't. I guess I could look at the gene. I guess we had our gene networks, and I just found the genes that were highly associated with that. And so vitellogenic could have been in the list. I don't remember seeing that in the list, but I could look further into that.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Last question, Jeff.
Okay, actually got two questions. So the first question I was thinking when I was looking at your research is, did you consider, so I have colonies that will create a lot of drones where it might be 20% of their colony and some that will create maybe 5%. So did you consider that when you're looking at, so maybe your line 1 is producing a low number of very high quality drones where line 4 might have been producing a lot of low quality drones, but they're saturating the area in their genetics? Did you look at that metric?
No, I really love that question. That's something I think I really want to look into. Well, so first off, I think the production of like the number of drones that a colony produce, I think it's a really interesting trait because that's a way for a colony to, invest into reproduction. And so how much does that vary? One thing we did find was, and I don't have this reported, but so for each line, I had 5 to 7 colonies per line. And sometimes I'd put a drone comb into a colony and I come back the next day. And if you ever put drone comb into a colony, usually the queen will just jump right onto it and lay right away. And so for some colonies, the queen was laying a ton of drones on it, whereas other colonies, the queen wasn't laying drones at all. I even caged the queen on some of the frames, and she started laying worker eggs into the drone comb. And so I think it's a fascinating trait. I think I really like to look into. But I mean, just within the lines, there's a ton of variation in how much the queens are laying. And obviously there's a lot of environmental noise playing a role in that. But I mean, the colonies were treated exactly the same and they were around the same size. So that's something I'd like to look more into in the future.
Okay. The other part of the question was, is there any way for the queens to tell they've been inseminated by quality live sperm versus unlive sperm? Because I've seen other research that indicates that some queens are mating with, we used to be like 15 to 20 drones, but they'll show that it may mate with 3 to 4 times that number of drones. So it makes me wonder if the queens can somehow sense that they're not getting something they need, so they keep going out and trying to get more and more.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So just start here. I think that's such an open field that we don't know much about. I think there's some old research showing that a queen will store like a set number of sperm, but I don't think that's necessarily true. It's possible that the queen may mate more often because they are mating with low quality drones. But what's interesting, I'm not sure how they would sense that, but they possibly could. Now, what's interesting about, I guess, the mating system is when the drone sperm is in the oviduct right before it actually gets stored, the sperm tails are really long, so it's all clumped together. And so, if a drone is producing sperm that's 50% dead, that's still going to be stored because it's being pumped into the spermatheca. And so, maybe a queen can sense whether there's a higher proportion of live versus dead sperm. But if a queen is sensing just based on the raw number of sperm that she's storing, I don't think that would have changed the equation at all. So no, that's a good question. I think that's requires more research.
Yeah, I saw an interesting presentation out of Canada where they were looking at queens, the time of year that they're being mated, because they have such a short window there. And then the early mated queens, they were dissecting them and looking at the spermatophita and counting them out of sperm. And the ones they were finding were failing, didn't head below the 2 million threshold, but they found some queens that had upwards of like 7 million. And those are the higher quality queens that survived more than a season. So this is an interesting presentation to listen to after having listened to that one, to see different angles looking at the same problem.
Yeah. Do you know the researcher? Do you know?
Yeah, I can look that up and send it to you.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. And so, yeah, and that's one thing with beekeepers too, when you're, mating queens early in the spring. I mean, there's gonna be less drones, and drones tend to be lower quality in the spring too, just be the lack of nutrients and some of these other factors associated with the spring. And so, yeah, that can be contributing to poor queen quality also. I mean, in Indiana, they're starting to raise queens now, and we still have a little bit of snow on the ground. And so I can't imagine as many drones out flying. So
Right.
Garrett, do you have time for one more question? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I think there's one in the chat I missed.
Oh, and while he's looking, Cindy, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, hi. Yes, I guess I just don't fully understand it's partially answered about the queens not using the frames. I used drone frames last year as part of my varroa mite management, but both my queens just avoided those frames like the plague. They just were laying everywhere but on them. And I guess I don't fully understand why they would do that.
Yeah, it's something that's kind of eluded me a little bit too, and I don't know why. I guess, you know, during this experiment I had, you know, 40 to 50 colonies, and so some I put into the middle of the colony and the queen would lay right away, and sometimes it wouldn't. And so I guess the question is, I guess, is that a queen decision, or is that a worker decision? Like, what's regulating that decision to actually produce drones? And so, you know, because really the production of drones is really this extra asset to a colony, right? They start producing drones when they have all the nutrients and everything they need to really survive and thrive. And so once they're kind of past that and they had stored nutrients, or they're a really healthy colony, they start investing to drones. And so it's possible, and this is kind of speculation, that if a colony is facing some kind of high row number or high virus load or something like that, that they may invest less into the drones. And so that's all kind of speculation, but it's possible that that could be a factor. But I still need to look more into that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Keeks had a question about what are some actions home beekeepers can take to improve drone quality. Yeah, so this is a question I get quite a bit, and you know, it's kind of tough for me to answer because I can provide a lot of recommendations on what a beekeeper could do. But what's really fascinating about the mating behavior of drones is they fly 3 to 4 miles away, and so you could be doing all these really great management practices, but your queen could still be mating with drones from your local neighbor. And so, but the one thing I probably would recommend is, I guess, whenever you're producing queens or your queen begins mating flights, just to try to avoid any really harsh treatments. So like Amitraz in the spring, if you're buying queen cells or producing your own queens. I guess another thing you can do is, make sure you manage your mite level. That's probably the biggest thing you can do. And so, and then you also mentioned that heat causes a drop in drone quality. Does that put a region with its traditionally mild summers at an advantage? Yeah, so so that's kind of tough to say. It kind of depends on, I don't know enough about your region and how warm it gets, but even if you get like a few really warm days, and I think there's a researcher, Alison McAfee. I'm not sure if she spoke to your group, but she did some really cool research on this, and I think she's pretty close in BC to your region, and she found that during some really hot days that a lot of these drones were kind of dropping and dead on the ground. And so I guess for your region, if your days are mild for the most part, that probably won't be a problem. But there are all these kind of fluctuations throughout the summer that can cause poor quality drones. So Med Hat, yeah, perfect, cool.
I think you got them all.
Okay.
This has been an amazing talk, Garrett. Thank you so much. This is so much information and it's so interesting.
No,
So
thank you for
you.
having me. I really enjoyed talking to your group, and a lot of great informed beekeepers, and hopefully I can speak to your group again in the future about some updates.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you back in a year or so if we see how the updates are going. That would be wonderful.
Great, thank you very much.
All right. So one quick question. Let's see. Let's see here. We have some vendors here who do some great presentations, and I kind of scooted over that part. So Dave, are you interested in doing a quick presentation? I know you just traveled in from somewhere and maybe a little jet lagged.
Yeah, I can do that. I can do that. I think I'll do a real quick presentation, and I can kind of see people dropping off the meeting like mites after an alcohol wash. So I'll try to be quick. Is that up there? Is my screen up there?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Dave Schiefelbein, and I am one of the vendors here tonight, and my company is Elite Honey and Bee. And I'll spend a little time about what we sell, but I'm going to skip. I did just come back today, just a couple hours ago from Northern California, which is where we source our bees. And I want to talk about how what's happening in California and the Central Valley in general affects all of us here. So just a little bit about my product. We have a very good warranty. There's that color red, which is the color of our queens this year. We do stand behind all of our queens, both in our nukes and our packages. We sell packages, Caucasian, New World, Carniolan, Italians. I want to talk, everything is on our website, which is elitehoneyandbee.com, all spelled out. The main thing I kind of want to talk about is we have pushed out our delivery dates, each of them by 1 week. For our packages, for our queens. Before we were going to be able to supply queens to the Seattle metropolitan area by April 16th, but we have pushed that out 1 week. So we'll have queens throughout the season beginning April 23rd instead of April 16th. And then we maintain a queen bank throughout the season as well. And we do also offer 5-frame nukes with the same delivery dates. Both of those delivery dates have been pushed out. We've talked the past 2 months about the advantages as far as a developing colony goes when you select a nuke over a package. We do sell both. Nukes, of course, are more expensive, but they will also pretty much give you a 3-week jump on what a package will give you if you are starting out your colony. And then just how we select our nukes, we select them by hand out in the field. When we are in California, we inspect every frame of every single nuke before we bring it back. And if we find any disease or something that we do not like, we reject those nukes. But this is really what I want to talk about, and it adds to what Dawn was saying earlier. She was talking about our season here in Western Washington, which these are my bees in my yard on the crocus, which are our first bloomer of the season. And our spring is starting to pop a little bit, but I saw as I flew over Seattle at 5 o'clock this afternoon, we're still looking, you know, pretty not leafed out in the Seattle area. Here's what California looks like right now. This was mid-February. And this is Northern California where we get our bees. It's green, 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 as green as I've ever seen it. And there's a reason for that. And that has to do with the type of winter and the type of spring that's been happening in the Central Valley. This is a picture of that I showed last month of the almond orchards in February. The picture on the right is a little later in March. That's an unusual season. Everything is slowed down. A lot of the bees that we get up here, they get their start coming out of almonds, but it's a bit more complicated a process than just like, oh, we get the bees out of almonds and we put them into packages. That's not quite how it works. But what happened in almonds, which is why there is a bee breeding industry in California, directly affects when we get bees. So they've had a slow season in California. And as someone who sells bees and is in contact with the people that I buy my product from, that's Heikem's honeybees out of Orland, California, I'm always watching the weather in California. It's been a slow spring down there, to say the least. I've been there 3 times in the last 4 weeks. So I've seen it firsthand. I've talked to my breeder, and I can see it by watching the weather. So this is the type of thing over here on the left that I am watching. First of all, everybody down there was at least 2 weeks behind on getting bees out of almonds. And that means they're at least 2 weeks behind in the beginning of breeding. But that's just the start of it, because then you have to look at the temperatures for mating, and then you have to look at things like rainfall. Here we are today, and well, let's go to the middle picture. That's California in the second week of March. That's a shot that I took when I'm down there. These almond trees are not very full. They have some blossoms on them, but that second week of March usually is when people are starting to think that they're going to be pulling bees out of almond, and you can still see standing water in the fields. It's just a different type of season. And then here we are today in Orland, where I get my bees, raining and 43 degrees. That is not conducive to mating weather at all. So consequently, that's the reason that we have pushed back our delivery dates by 1 week each. And you know, that's something that I don't like telling my customers, and that I don't like doing, but I prefer to bring back a quality product as opposed to one that's kind of rushed through the process. Our speaker tonight talked about trying to mate bees. I believe he was referring to the Midwest when there's still snow on the ground. It's kind of the same thing that's happening in California. It's just not weather that is conducive to bee mating. So everything is pushed back. Now, that's kind of a drag because we have such a short season here. But at the same time, since our spring looks like it's also delayed a bit, I see it as something that just kind of evens out. I think we're going to have a different type of season this year. Last year, it was cold and wet almost through June. This year, things are behind. And that's just one of the things we deal with as people that supply bees.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dave. It's always so nice hearing from you. It's kind of not just vendor information, but all education information on where we're going to be at with our bees this year. Thank you so much. Peter, did you want to pop in and say anything, or?
No, I'm good. This has been very educational. Somebody that's new, but it'd be interesting to actually spot one of those drone congregation areas and just see what it looks like. I'm not quite
It
sure.
would. Just keep working on that. Yeah.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, no, I don't have a whole lot to add to what Dave said. He gave a really good overview of the bee production season down in California at the moment. I was just looking at the 10-day weather report for Grass Valley, which is where the Olivers are. And most of the highs are in the 40s. There are 2 days in the next 10 days, barely over 50, and you can't get decent mating weather until it's at least 60. So yeah, as Dave said, the season's going slow down in California. I haven't had a specific update from the Olivers on what they're thinking we'll be looking at, but yeah. Assume that things are delayed. They planned in a little bit of a delay this year, so I'm hoping we may not be delayed much, but we'll see.
But also, so there will be some new producers that are sort of on time with, but those are Hawaiian queens. So one of the things that you're getting when you're also getting bees that have had a little weather is they've had a little weather like we have. So they are not the earliest because they've gone through a little bit more weather like we have.
But yeah, I've still got bees available. I posted my link in chat. I've got Golden West nukes from Randy Oliver, and I've also got a few of my second planned round of spring splits available, and then I'll have summer nukes if people want to wait for locally mated queens too.
And yeah, let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much. And you guys, thank you for coming tonight. That was a great talk. It was really wonderful to see how many people were here, and you had really great questions. Next month, we've got Jeff Ott coming out, who's a famous beekeeper. He does a podcast. He's really a great guy. And he's going to talk to us about using technology in the bee yard, which is kind of a hot new topic. There seems to be new technologies coming out all the time. So thank you. Have a fantastic evening. Have a great month, and we'll see you at the next meeting.